This is a continuation of our series, Claude for Software Testers. So, what we're going to do today is have a discussion around vibe coding. So, one of the things that I recently talked to somebody about and they were having an issue with, they had created an activity where they wanted to do a vibe coding for some project that they were working on, and it was clearly not working. So what we had to do is essentially had to take a step back, make sure that it was working, even though that Claude said it was working fine. And this is a real challenge that I see in a lot of the vibe coding things that are done today. It creates a challenge for sure because a lot of the people that are creating these vibe coding apps don't know a whole lot about development, and they really don't know a whole lot about testing. So, throughout this series, we're going to create an application that is going to help us incorporate all the aspects of software testing. But I do think it's real important for us as test practitioners to be able to educate others who are creating different apps as it relates to Claude AI or just general AI applications, for example. But we have a unique skill set as software testers because we have that background so that we know what is going to work and what is not going to work. So, this is something that we can really use to our advantage as we move forward. So, from a software testing perspective, and even some of the previous applications that I've built through vibe coding, I have wanted Claude to make sure it's applying a software testing approach first. So, a lot of you may know this as TDD or some other nomenclature throughout software testing. But so, this is really what I want us to focus on today. Before we start vibe coding, before we start laying the requirements or the architecture, we really want to apply software testing first and then go from there. So let's start with Claude and let's just basically tell it this is what we want it to do. All right. So I will start and just do the recording. Claude, what we're trying to do today is make sure that before we do any vibe coding for this series on software testing, we want to make sure that the things are thoroughly tested first, that we are applying all the right sorts of software testing principles, such as unit testing, integration, end-to-end testing activities. And we really want to apply a software testing approach first. So, what do we need to do in terms of building the strategy or the approach for testing? How do we want to incorporate all the best practices as it relates to testing? Do we want to come up with a test plan, a test strategy, test cases? What do you think that we should do best? In addition to that, we are probably going to be creating AI agents. So we want to make sure that is thoroughly tested. And we want to make sure that we're using things like Playwright to create not only API tests, but more integration and end-to-end testing activities. And then I think what we're going to need to do is also create a master test prompt to make sure that all the best practices are incorporated as a part of our testing. Before you start this activity, please make sure that you review this and that you ask me any questions that may be helpful so that you get all this organized. And I want you to make sure that you are incorporating all the best practices as it relates to software testing and apply the principles of test first and then develop. Do you understand this request? All right, so I basically had plugged it in. It looked like at the end it stopped. I guess there may be some sort of limitation, but it's actually going through and thinking, trying to figure out what is needed to be done from that perspective. Let's see what it comes back. It looks like it's asking for scope. And one of the things I asked it to do as well is provide any clarifications before it starts things. I think that's a really important part of the prompt itself, is that you're needing the AI to understand what's going on, and you want the AI to ask you any questions before it just starts off. So that's one of the things that I've noticed is clarifying questions are super important. And otherwise, Claude's just going to go off and do things on its own without asking any sort of clarifying questions. It looks like it's starting to build the test strategy. And again, it's coming back with some additional questions. So let's see what it is coming up with. All right, so it's clearly asking for a test strategy. RiskRadar is the application that we're basically going to build as a part of this project. We want it to obviously have certain standards, right? So in terms of software testing, standards are really important, right? And I really reiterate that with the teams that I'm leading, making sure that everything is consistent, right? If we're creating a defect, it always has the same consistency in terms of titles, descriptions, steps, screenshots, logs. All those things are really important. So we want to make sure that the AI is standard from that perspective. I also told it that we wanted to have AI agents. So I wanted to make sure that it knew that ahead of time so that we're not having to go back and add that later on. And then a master test prompt. This is something that I've worked on in the past, but we want to make sure that prompting is really important for the AI. So the more information that you can give the prompt, then the better the output is going to be. And it's really important to get that right. And you can make that better over periods of time, but having the right prompt is really everything. And then at the end, it's got short notes around performance, security, accessibility. All those things are important as it relates to testing and testing practices. All right, so it's asking for 6 types of clarifications. Who is the audience? We're going to have a series of 20 to 29 to 30 videos as a part of this. The depth of the AI testing. So a lot of this, as it relates to AI, is really non-standard and a really important aspect of it. It goes into data sets, LLM as being the judge, prompt regression, verification, latency, cost, etc. All right, it's asking who runs the master test prompt. So essentially, it is going to be for Claude, right? And then stack confirmation. So it's starting to ask what technologies are being used: React, SQL, PyTest, Playwright, GitHub, all those things, and then quality gates. So the other thing as a part of quality, as we all know, is to have certain quality gates, right? What is going to block a merge? So if something isn't tested, if a pass fail rate is not high enough, if there's a critical defect, for example, what is the threshold going to be from that perspective? And so then it's asking, once you ask these questions, then it's going to start providing the context and the gates as it relates to the process. Let's say, yes, Claude, this sounds right. Let's go ahead and proceed. Ask me the relevant questions, and then we will be able to start and continue. All right, let's feed this in. The other thing that you noticed is I'm using the voice as a part of this. So it really eliminates the need to type. And it looks like it does a pretty good job with the transcription part. So that's something that you can do as well as you're building and leveraging Claude AI. Okay, so the first question is, and I'm just going to say, Claude, ask me these questions one by one. Because a lot of times what it'll do is it'll go through and it'll ask you a bunch of questions. And so to me, it's easier if it just does it one by one. That way, we're not having to try to remember things. Let's see. Who are these 5 testing documents for? So it's going to be for the curriculum, internal working docs, real world docs. So, yes, correct, Claude. The answer is C. Okay, so we've answered the first question. Number 2. So, when do you want these documents to show up? Option A is front loaded at a foundational testing episode before any risk radar is shown. B, source of truth, now formally taught later. Let's do option A. Claude, this is the actual introduction session to this, so let's go with option A for this answer. All right, we're going with option A. And essentially, it's reinforcing basically what I said. So we're going to start it first, and this kind of shows the foundational level of things, and then we'll move forward with that. All right, moving on to question 3. How deep do we go? All right. Let's see. My recommendation is full V1. Cover the complete picture of the doc, even if we introduce concepts progressively across episodes. All right, let's just say, Claude, let's go with your recommendation on this question. All right, let's see. All right, question 4 out of 6, primary audience. 2 versions. They serve generally different purposes. So the first version is Claude facing operational, and then teaching versions. Let's do Claude, let's do what you recommend, and let's have the 2 versions as we move forward as a part of the master test prompt. Because part of this is getting Claude to do it the right way, but then the other part of this is probably the more important part is the teaching aspect of all these courses and videos that we're going to talk about. All right, question 5. It's really asking about the stack. So what do we want to do? All right, my recommendation, this is what Claude is saying, prompt foo for the eval tool plus vtest, RTL, final stack becomes playwright, by test. Let's see, stack additions. Let's ask it, is there, I could just do the video, voice, is there a cost to this? And also, what are the benefits of doing one over the other? Yeah, because I really don't want to make this an expensive thing. A lot of times you have to prompt Claude and ask it because otherwise it's going to go off and do all these things that, you may not need or require from that perspective. All right, so the first option, prompt foo, is basically going to be token cost. Let's see, my recommendation. So bottom line, $5 to $20 a month with LLM. I'll say yes. That will be. Let me actually do. Is there a cheaper option, Claude, than the recommended approach? Ideally, I want to do everything as much as I can through Claude. I don't want to have to use OpenAI or different AI components. So exclusively Claude, if at all possible. And then I want to obviously make the rest of it open source or free. All right, let's see what it comes back with. All right, 0, reoccurring cost, Claude only. So I think Claude only will be fine. All right. Yes, Claude. Let's go with Claude only. That'll be fine. All right, Claude only. So now we're basically to question 6. And let's see what recommendations are. Claude, let's go with the recommendations you are making for this item. All right, everything has been answered. Now it's going to go off and create all these things. And another thing that you can see is markdown files. So a lot of the AIs use these markdown files for information. So it looks like it's going to do it. As you can see, it's going to be a lot of words and a lot of content here. But I want to ask it, hey, Claude, before you do this, I want to make sure that all this is solid and there's not any gaps. In addition to this, is there anything that is missing that we have already discussed or plan to cover in additional video series? Please review the video list to make sure that all of these things are comprehensive and that there's not going to be a gap that we're going to have to fill in later. All right, let's see what it says. See, here I had to prompt it, even though we already have a video plan together, because I felt like there was things that were missing as a part of this. This is something that clarifying questions, always asking questions, these things are really important as it relates to that. So it's always good to keep asking questions, keep refining, making sure that Claude is doing the right thing before it just rushes off to do things, which it has a tendency and a habit, as most of the LLMs do. So now it's doing that comparison. Let's basically wait and see what happens from this perspective. So as you can see, there's 23 gaps that it has found. That's pretty significant. And this is the problem. things that I'm noticing from a Claude perspective, for example, common gaps. So it's going through, it's looking at all the modules. Here are the gaps that it's uncovered, right? So test data management is a huge area of testing. That was a big gap. Exploratory testing, another gap. Performance, we're certainly going to talk about that. Security, accessibility, CI/CD architecture, debugging and reporting, testing AI systems. And so here's additional gaps. A lot of the activities that we've talked about, actually around things like Selenium, you're going to see a lot of end-to-end tests. So those tests are going to be flaky, right? So that's a big issue. Another area is around the testing pyramid, which you need to make sure that you have the right balance there. So it's going back through looking at that. So that's pretty important. At the lower level, you want to have more unit than integration than end to end. So that's basically the breakout for that. Sometimes you need mock services, right? When you can't have the actual data. So you want to make sure that gets done. Definition of done as it relates to Agile is super important. Then test naming documentation standards. So that's pretty critical as well. All right. So it's basically, it's wanting to do the architecture first. I'm just reading through this to make sure. 2 additional questions. Architecture first. Let's go with, actually, I just want to go with option B. Claude, for the first question, let's go with option B. I want it to be a generic test plan, test strategy, and then we will build RiskRadar. And then on the second question, I want you to basically take care of all the gaps and move all this forward. We want a comprehensive test strategy as a part of all this. We don't want any gaps in our process, and we want these to be focused on the modules that we are generating. All right, let's see what it does. All right, it's locking it in. Okay, so it's actually going to start creating the documents. All right, let's see. Yep, so it's going to be a lot of documents. Let me ask it this. Claude, what if you were to take these components and actually make these AI agents for the different things that need to be done? Does that make any sense? Or do you feel like you should just generate the documents as is and put it in the right repositories? Because I'm assuming we're going to have multiple iterations of RiskRadar and multiple versions. So does it make sense to have these as separate AI agents, or how do you want to do that? And in addition to that, what about the Claude skills part? Is there anything that could be leveraged about existing skills, or do you want to build all this from scratch as it relates to these things? All right, let's see what it does. All right. Okay, so you actually want 3 layers, which is the documents, which it's going to build, and then skills. Okay. So it's basically pushing back on the skill on the AI agents, which I thought was interesting. It's basically saying that the skill can do it, which I think that makes sense. Okay, so the skills are teachable on camera. You can show them. All right, skills are free. Okay, so the agents are going to be used rather sparingly. All right, let's see my recommendations. So build the 5 documents first. Okay, yep. I think we're going to go with let's just say, let's do this. I agree, Claude. Let's just go with your recommendation. We'll build the documents first, and then we will take things from there. All right. Documents first, then skills, then agents. All right. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of let this run for a while. And then I think what I'll do is I'll finish this video out, and then we will make the next video. I'll pick up basically where all this documentation is done, because this is going to churn out for a while. No need to have y'all sit here. So we'll pick this up in the next series. But as you can just see, like, it's a lot of question and answer. A part of a lot of the learning is you're taking the knowledge that you have gained or you have from previous activities, previous exercises, and you're really trying to incorporate this as a part of the AI. So it's important that it knows and hones in on what's important and what really matters, because that's going to really get you the maximum output out as it relates to the AI and getting it to really do what you want it to do from that perspective. I'll stop it here. We will pick up the next series where we'll have all the documentation ready to go, and then we'll take it from there. So look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you for your time. Bye.